Good afternoon, everyone. We'll give ourselves about another 40 seconds to see if people are still coming on. So we'll start in about another 40 seconds. While we're doing some housekeeping, waiting for everybody to get on, if you have a question, please ask the question in the chat or in the Q&A. I will be asking Sophie these questions at the end, and then we'll be answering these on the live session. And if we run over, we'll be answering them live inside the app, inside the chat. Audio sounds good. All right. Well, I want to introduce Sophie. She's an amazing maker and fabricator, and really extraordinary at a lot of different things. I'm also happy to have her at Virtual Maker Faire this year. Again, she was supposed to be here in person, but things happen, and we're makers, so we make things still happen. So I'm gonna turn over to her. I'm gonna mute myself and stop my video, but I'll be back later to ask her questions. So if you want to ask her, Sophie, any questions, please put them in the chat and put them in the Q&A. Sophie, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming, and I hope you can all hear me. Let me know if the audio is weird or if anything drops out. I'm gonna share my screen so you can see my presentation. So actually the first part of this whole experience was a pre-recorded video that I did as a presentation about my designs, my work, and one of my projects. So I'm just gonna walk us through that presentation quickly, and then I'm excited to take your questions and get your feedback. So let me share my screen and share. Okay. So I'm calling this presentation Dream Big and Make Stuff because that's pretty much how I work. And I basically, I like to come up with ideas or things that I want or challenges that I want to attempt. And I like those ideas to be kind of ambitious and a little bit scary. And I like them to include something I have to learn that I haven't done before. And then I jump in and I kind of navigate my way to the end using design. So I'm really a designer. My background is in design, and I just use design thinking to figure out everything I need to learn on the way to getting to the end and make all the decisions that I have to make to finish my project. So a lot of the things that I make are wearable tech projects because that's what I'm interested in. I love technology and I love identity and fashion and wearable work. So I like to put those things together. And so some of my work looks like this. This is an LED manicure. So there's an LED on every nail. There's actually 3 LEDs on every nail, and then a microcontroller on each wrist. And this is the single color LED version. And this is the RGB LED version that I did with Adafruit NeoPixels. And that is something that I wrote up as a tutorial as well. So a lot of my work I write up as tutorials so that other people can make them and change them and use the techniques that I've learned to make your own projects. And this is my Flappy Bird controller hoodie. So this is like another way to get technology into a wearable project. I like to just integrate it into something that is already wearable, like a hoodie or a jacket. And this is kind of an immersive way to play Flappy Bird. So the idea here is that little circle on this area of the hoodie is a microcontroller, and there's some conductive fabric underneath the arm. And when you flap your wings, like when you flap your arms, it basically flaps your wings in the Flappy Bird game. And so you can play Flappy Bird by just flapping like a bird. And you know, that's what it looks like when you're playing. It's super fun. And it's just another way to play a game is wear the controller on your body. This is the project that I'm currently working on. You can actually see it behind me here. This is an example of when I use technology in my process, but the final piece doesn't necessarily have any electronics in it. So this is a 3D printed dress that I'm working on. And it is made up of a lot of panels that I've 3D printed onto mesh with my printer. So here's an example of the panels. And you can see they're really flexible because I'm printing this sort of cellular design of all of these different shapes, but they're not connected onto this mesh fabric, which then connects them but maintains this like flexibility. So these are really cool, and I challenged myself to make an entire garment out of this using this process. So it's coming along, it's almost done. I'm working on the under layer now. That's gonna be like sort of the base lining of the dress. So I'm doing a lot of sewing. And this is my spacesuit. So I also make a lot of costumes. I love costumes, and I've got another costume here I'm working on. This spacesuit is one of my favorite things I've ever made, and it's an original design. I sewed that base jumpsuit out of satin. I designed that from scratch, and then the sort of rigid pieces on top, they're made out of EVA foam. I designed all of that from scratch. And the helmet is a costume helmet that I totally changed and added a lot of stuff to. That has a lot of foam on it as well. And I thought it would be fun to walk through this project as an example of my design process and how I created this, because like I said, I really like this project for myself, but I also have been able to connect with a filmmaker who wanted to use it in a shoot. So what's super exciting is I don't have this spacesuit in the studio with me today because it just went out to a video shoot. So it's coming back in the mail now, and we'll see how it comes back. The video shoot was in the Badlands, so it's a super epic sci-fi location. The photos coming back look great, and I'm so excited to see that video. But I just wanted to share that as something amazing. Like you might make something for yourself and think that you're the only person who desperately wants this thing, but it might actually reach other people and be interesting to other people. And I just never thought that could happen. So I want to let you know a little bit about how this even came to be. And there is already a video. There are a couple of videos about this. There's this one on Tested, which you can check out on their website. And I did a tutorial about how I made the helmet. That's in Hackspace magazine. It's also in my Wearable Tech Projects book from Hackspace magazine. And there's a tutorial in Make magazine about how I made the suit portion. So that's specifically how I did the laser cutting for the chest armor and the rest of the suit. So when I say the word spacesuit, like, I think a lot of people think this, this is the NASA spacesuits. On the left, you can see the spacesuit that they're using in spacewalks now on the space station. And on the right, you can see the A7L. That's the spacesuit that they used in the Apollo missions. It's super iconic. It's really recognizable. And this is what a lot of people have in mind when I say, oh, I made a spacesuit. But you can tell, my spacesuit doesn't look like that at all, because my spacesuit's an original design. And as much as I love NASA's spacesuits, I wanted to make something original. I wanted to create something on my own. So I started this project the way I start all my projects, and that's with research. I always dig into research. I gather a lot of images of things that are appealing to me, and I go really wide. Like I will try to gather things that I don't even think are going to work for my project, just to put them in the mix. And then I weed out the things that don't make sense, and I narrow it down to a really directed bunch of inspiration. So here are the things that I picked out for this project. So I love Alien. I love the costumes in Alien. You can definitely see where some of the things in my suit come from when you look at this, because you can see the Alien suit has a lot of texture. I love this cinematic look of the light shining on the person's face, on Sigourney Weaver's face inside her helmet. 2001: A Space Odyssey is huge visual inspiration for me. The Expanse, I love the costumes in The Expanse. love the look in Alien Covenant, Battlestar Galactica. And if you look at all of these things that I've just shown you, all of these helmets have lights in them and they're really cool looking. And that's what I really wanted. That was my main inspiration and like motivation for this whole project, is I just wanted a helmet that I could put on my head that would shine lights on my face and look epic. So knowing that that's what I wanted, that's where I started. And I kind of pulled elements out from all of these different sources that I'd identified. If you look at the helmet that I started with, it looks nothing like those, right? It's like this is a costume helmet that I bought on Amazon for 40 bucks. And I wanted to make this look like this. You know, I wanted all of this cool, like, mystery and technology. Like, I wanted this kind of drama to come out of this costume helmet. So you can kind of see what I did when you look at them side by side. So I added a lot of material on top, and I changed some of the lines that I didn't like and preserved some of the lines that I did like. So I love that kind of egg shape around the head. So I really wanted to keep that, but I didn't like that wavy area on the neck. So I covered that up with a lot of foam and texture and other design lines to try to mask that as much as possible. I did a lot of laser cutting. I used laser cut foam to create these different textures that I could apply in different places. And I was trying to tell like a material story about this piece. So even though it's all EVA foam, it's all the same material that I'm putting on it, I tried to create different surface textures that would look like different materials once they were painted up. And I knew I couldn't change the color of the visor, which is blue. So I decided to commit to blue as a big color in my color palette, and try to make that blue visor look intentional instead of like something that I just, you know, there was nothing I could do anything about. So I used blue as the base color of the helmet and the base color of the suit. I have a lot of, I really wanted to get electronics into it. I really wanted to get lights into the helmet. So I used a lot of components from Adafruit. I love Adafruit components, so I always use them in my work. I put some side lights in the side of the helmet, and those are sound activated lights. So when I talk, the lights flash on the outside. And then I also really wanted to get the lights shining on the inside of the helmet. So that's a strip of Adafruit NeoPixels. I created these little diffusers for the side lights out of hot glue. And when you paint hot glue, it paints so well. So I just painted up this hot glue with silver paint and threw a little weathering on it, and it looks like metal, but you still can get diffusion through it once it's painted. This is unpainted, but it still glows beautifully. I love hot glue as a diffuser. I stole some things from objects in my house to go onto my helmet. So you can see those little plastic latches from this box ended up as little tie downs on my helmet, and I just painted them to look like everything else. So when you add paint, everything just kind of comes together. And that's the finished helmet. That's just the helmet there. And I got to this point and I thought like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is what I want. And took this photo and I was like, yeah, but I need a suit now, because you can't just have a helmet without a suit. So it's the same process. I went back to the beginning. I looked at my inspiration. I looked at the same inspiration from the same movies that I was looking at the helmets of. And I looked at their suits and I kind of picked them apart in the same way. And I decided like what I was going to take. You know, I like this kind of backpack shape on this one. I like the kind of more utilitarian look of the Martian, but maybe it's got a little too much going on for what I wanted to do. I love First Contact. Star Trek First Contact has great suits. They are super simple, and I like that simplicity. So I kind of took that idea for my suit. Armageddon is the total opposite end of the spectrum. It's got so much texture, so much going on, but I like how those textures give a lot of surfaces for the light to bounce off of, and it looks really kind of complicated, like there's a lot to dig into there. So I love that sort of texture. And then Sunshine is like such a wacky spacesuit from Sunshine, but I love it. So the gold in my spacesuit was really inspired by this gold suit from Sunshine. So after I had my ideas kind of roughed out in my head and through the inspiration process, and I started sketching. I did more sketching for the suit than I did for the helmet. And I worked through the same process. I just kind of built it piece by piece. This is me kind of fitting the foam portions off of my body so that they would fit properly when they were done. And you notice, like, I'm putting the helmet on when I'm working this out because I know I want it to work together. So I'm not just gonna work on one piece without having the other piece in the mix. I want them to feel like I made them at the same time. So I need them to refer to each other properly. Just a lot of fitting. I have to do a lot of fitting in my work because wearables need to fit your body. So there's a lot of prototyping and reworking and fitting that goes on. I did a lot of scanning, a lot of work in Illustrator because this is all laser cut. So everything I was designing had to be digitized in Illustrator. And here's the flat piece when it comes out of my laser cutter. But when I close up those darts and wrap it together and connect all the open areas, it turns into this cool body shape. And so this was the base layer of the chest armor, and then I just kept adding more layers to it to build up that structure to make it feel like, you know, something really substantive. And I've experimented with ways to hide the seams, so I didn't have to go in and fill in and smooth out seams after the fact. I thought, oh, it would be much more convenient if I could just work the seams into the design so that you can't tell that there's a seam there. So here's an example of that. This is a shoulder piece. A lot of priming, filling, sanding, and paint. Again, like when you hit it with primer, it's like, oh my gosh, my vision is coming true. This is crazy. I love the gray primer moment in these projects. And then more paint and weathering. And I got to the end, and, you know, I got to have this cinematic moment. I mean, I feel like I say that all the time when I talk about this project. I got to have my cinematic moment. And I think it's important to acknowledge, like, you don't have to have like a really huge purpose for the thing that you want to make. Like, literally, I wanted this photo, and that was my driving goal and my dream. And I put in all of this work to get it, you know, and it was so worth it to me. I love having that feeling. And then, like I said, someone else who actually wanted to use it in a music video. That's so cool. So, you know, you might think, like, why would I want to make a spacesuit? But if you want to make a spacesuit, you should. And I have tutorials out there that can help you make your vision come true. So these are just some shots, some detail shots of different areas. And yeah, that's my suit and my helmet. So I think that's pretty much all I had to present. And I would love to take questions and anything that anyone wants to throw in there. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yep, stop sharing. So can you show the mesh again so that everybody can see a big screen, the mesh?
Oh, yeah.
On the...
So here's that 3D printed mesh. And you can see, I don't know if you can see it actually, because this is such a short print, but here's a thicker one. This one has some dimension in the print. You can see it popping off there, and that the mesh is really on the bottom surface. And it just retains this kind of flexible property that's super cool. So again, for this project, I did a ton of research. I have a lot of different samples that I did of 3D printing on mesh. You know, I did a lot of different samples to figure out like, how far apart do I want to space these? How thick do I want each piece to be? Could I make something, you know, bigger, like bigger shapes? And I just experimented with like how the different shapes were going to affect the finished material. And that's what's super exciting to me about this project, because like I said, I'm a designer, so I love when I can really highlight the design aspect in the process. And this project is all design. It's really all about how I can change the materials properties purely through the shapes that I'm designing.
So I know you posted this, but how do you put them together? Can you talk about the 3D print, 3D
Yeah.
pens you use? Sorry, 3D pens,
Yeah.
3D printing pens. Got that
So
up. 3D printing pens.
I'm looking to see if I have an example. So the pieces, when they come out of the printer, they're often like this big, because my printer is only it's a 12-inch by 12-inch bed, but I need to leave some area for taping down the fabric on all sides, so I can really only print to about 10 by 10. And obviously this is way bigger than that, so I'm connecting pieces together to make a larger garment. And the way I'm doing that is I'm cutting I cut each piece so that it has a little bit of seam allowance. I'm calling it seam allowance around the shape, about a 1/2 inch around the shape. And then I have two pieces like that. So say these two pieces are supposed to go together. So they both have that seam allowance. I'll cut the seam allowance off of one of them and lay it right on top of the other one, exactly where it's supposed to go, make the shapes line up. And then I flip it over, and on the back, I take my 3D pen, which is this. 3D pen is like a 3D printer in your hand. You can use the same material and just draw where you want the print material to go. So I'm using the pen to weld the pieces together on the back. And here's a test example that I did. So this is like one piece here, one piece down here. This is like 4 pieces all together. And you can kind of see here where I've welded those pieces together on the back with the pen. And you can't really see it from the front. So it's taken a long time to get that many pieces together, but I find that it is smoother than sewing it together, because I can actually it's just like continuing the 3D printing process instead of having to introduce thread and seam allowances into the mix.
So I guess we have a question coming in about that is, what gave you the inspiration to do that? What was your source for 3D printing a dress?
Oh, so I have seen other people do a lot of 3D printing on fabric. David Shorey is a huge inspiration to me, and people should definitely go and check him out. He's on Instagram. He's got a YouTube channel. Actually, his YouTube channel has great tutorials about how to do this process. So I saw the work of David Shorey. I saw the work of some other people in the 3D printing community experimenting with this and making really cool stuff. And I wanted to just do some tests and explore it. And so I kind of took what I'd seen from other people and combined it with my visual inspiration, which for this project is specifically the Klingons from Star Trek Discovery. They have this really cool costume look that is sort of like bio armor. It looks like it's like you can't really tell whether they're wearing like clothing or whether it's grown out of their body. It looks really cool. So I have, you can't really see it because it's out of frame, but I have a whole wall of all of these shots, these images from the Klingons on Discovery. And I'm kind of using them as my visual inspiration. But yeah, definitely David Shorey's 3D printed scales on fabric, huge inspiration for this project.
What is the material that you're printing with? Like, what's the actual fabric? What's the mesh made out of?
So the mesh is, it's this, ooh, it's nylon tulle. It's called tulle, Tulle. It's basically just nylon netting, and you can buy it in yardage. You can buy it at like Joann's, any fabric store. You can buy it in like regular yardage width, which would be like 40, 45-inch width. But I actually really like this roll because it's already cut down to like 10 inches, 11 inches, 10 inches. Yeah, it's about 10 inches. So that's perfect for me. I roll it off this roll and I cut it, and then I only have to do one cut to prepare it to go into my printer. So I'm printing on nylon. If you check out David Shorey's work, he's printing on all kinds of different materials. He's printing on stainless steel mesh. He's printing on washi paper, tissue paper, super cool experiments going on in the 3D printing community around this process.
So I guess one of the questions about the lights now. So inside your helmet, how long did it take you to aim the light so it didn't blind you, or blind you so you can't see outward? I guess is the question. And get the planned look you wanted.
Yeah, so the lights inside the helmet are shining directly onto my face, and that is reflecting onto the inside of the visor and creating a glare. And so if I'm in a dark environment, I cannot see out of the helmet. So it's really important to say that, because you should not put lights inside a functional helmet. Don't put lights inside your motorcycle helmet. Don't put lights inside a helmet you want to actually move around in. It's not the way they do it in real spacesuits. It's the way they do it in Hollywood because it looks super cool. It also cuts down a lot on glare from the outside. So when they're filming the actor in the suit, you don't get a reflection of the camera. So there's some functional reasons they do it in Hollywood, but you should not do it in a functional, like real helmet. The way that I did it is, I've got two strips of the LEDs, one on the top and one on the bottom. They're running to a little microcontroller in the back of my helmet. I think it's an Itsy Bitsy M0 Express from Adafruit. And I actually am really happy that I chose NeoPixel LEDs because they're RGB LEDs. So that allowed me to tune the color of the light really precisely. So like I said, the helmet itself is blue, the shield is blue. And I was able to introduce some red and some green into the color of the light to neutralize that blue color a little bit on my face. So that was kind of a cool side effect of using the NeoPixels. But if it's light, if I'm wearing the helmet and the lights are on and it's a bright environment around me, I can actually see out pretty well. It's just if I go into a dark environment, which is where it looks best, that I can't really see out of the helmet. So I'm just very careful. Whenever I'm wearing that spacesuit at a convention or something, I always have someone with me who can help me if I get into a situation like that. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't see, safety.
Is there any fogging issues? Is there any issues with fogging? I guess that's a question came in. And how do you deal with the fogging?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So the helmet itself, it's a costume helmet, and it's actually got open vents in the helmet, and I made a specific decision not to cover those vents up. Obviously, in a real helmet, you wouldn't want those vents. Even in a Hollywood helmet, if you're doing a really tight shot on the actor, you wouldn't want to see any open vents in there. But for fogging and for air, I have to stay comfortable and safe inside my helmet. If I'm at a convention and it's a hot day, I really need some air. So I left those vents open. I also have a fan incorporated into my costume. So in the costume, I have a belt that goes around my waist, and on the back of the belt, there's a little box that has a fan in it, and a hose, basically a tube running up through the backpack of my suit into, there's a little outlet for the hose that comes up in the back of my suit, and my helmet goes over it. And that little fan with that tube of air, like pushes air into my helmet. And I have it pointed I kind of have it over my shoulder and I'm pointing directly into the front of my helmet, and it's blowing my air out of the vents. It's great. Like, it works out great. I didn't have any fogging issues when I was wearing it at the conventions that I've worn it to, because I was taking it really easy. You know, I wasn't like scrambling over hills or running around or anything like that. I know at the Badlands shoot that this suit just went to, that it was a little more challenging. Obviously, it was the desert, it was hot. They were just trying to manage that manually. She had some cool packs on, and she was taking a lot of breaks, taking the helmet off as much as possible. But for me, when I'm wearing it at a convention, I don't really have any issues with fogging because of those vents and because of that fan.
Okay, back to the dress. What are you using for your filament for the dress? What actual filament are you using?
So the filament for the dress is PLA, and it's specifically Wizard's Voodoo PLA from Filamentum. Filamentum makes beautiful, beautiful filament. It's premium stuff. It's not cheap, but it prints great, and they make these iridescent colors. So this color is called Wizard's Voodoo, and it's iridescent. It's kind of like photochromic. It has like blue particles and red particles and purple particles, like all in the mix. And when you look at it at different angles, it kind of changes color and it looks really glittery. The back is actually amazing. I'm printing directly onto a mirror, so it's a really, really flat surface. So the back of my print ends up looking like sequins. It's really gorgeous. I thought it was a little too distracting for to be used in this piece, but I might do something later with this kind of like sequin, super glossy look. But yeah, short answer is it's Wizard's Voodoo PLA from Filamentum.
How long did it take for the helmet and the whole costumes to get put together from beginning to end?
So the helmet took so I did the helmet in about 2 weeks. It's all kind of a blur, and some of the things got spread out, but I think that the helmet, I did it in about 2 weeks. I was doing it specifically, I was also documenting it so I could write it up as a tutorial. So that kind of skews the amount of time it takes to make something like that. And I also like work on my projects obsessively, so I don't take a lot of breaks, and I do like long stretches on my projects. So I think the helmet was about 2 weeks. I think the suit was also about 2 weeks. I remember taking about a week to sew the fabric portion, and then about another week to do all of the foam. And I was trying to get that done for Emerald City Comic Con, so I had this hard deadline. So I did pull a lot of late nights on that one, but doing the laser cutting was, once I figured out my workflow, it was really fast and saved a huge amount of time by not covering up any seams and just integrating them all into my design.
Any tips or hints on laser cutting EVA film?
Yes. Okay, so the laser cutter that I'm using is a Glowforge Basic, and but you could do it on other laser cutters as well. So a couple of things I learned when I was doing it. First of all, it's better to do 2 passes with the laser than try to cut it in one pass. So lower power and more passes is my suggestion. And the reason for that is cutting it. So 2 reasons. First of all, if you turn your laser on full blast, you're going to get a massive kerf. So when you cut through the laser, when you cut through the foam with the laser is going to leave a big trench in the cut, and that's going to give you less accurate results. If you do lower power and more passes, your piece will be more accurate. You'll give yourself a more accurate cut and less kerf, less material singed away as the laser is cutting through. Also, you need to keep the foam flat. So my foam comes in a huge roll. It's like a big roll that I buy from cosplay suppliers. And so when I unroll the foam and I cut it to fit into my laser cutter, it's got a natural curve, and you don't want that. You want your material to be as flat as possible in the laser cutter so that the laser is cutting accurately, and so that it's not going to bump anything. So, and three, so that once you cut it, your piece doesn't warp up. So the way I deal with that is I heat treat it before I put it into the laser, and that can take a lot of the curve out of it. So I cut my piece out to fit in the laser cutter, I grab my heat gun, and I wave my heat gun over it a few times, both sides. I'll do one side and then I'll do the other side, and I can see the curve kind of fall out of the material, and that makes it flat enough to sit in there by itself without having a lot of without having to figure out how to tie it down. But if I do need to tie something down, I mean like hold something down in there flat, I use magnets. So the crumb tray that you're putting the honeycomb that I'm putting my material on, it's metallic. So if I put a magnet on the top of the foam, it'll hold my foam in place. And the Glowforge allows me to do that pretty safely because it's got a camera embedded in the top of the laser. So I can check my view and make sure that my laser is not going to hit any of my magnets that are holding down my material. So there's more information about that in the Make magazine article that I did about cutting the laser. So check that out. That was from last year's summer issue.
Awesome. I guess another question came in is, what's the difference between a maker and a designer? I guess I said you were both, so people are asking me that question.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think there is any difference between a maker and a designer. I actually think everyone is a designer, and I also think everyone is a maker. I think if you make wooden tables, or you make spreadsheets, or you make sandwiches, you're a maker. And if you're making those things, you're also a designer, because you're making design choices about the thing that you're making. You just can't avoid making design choices. So everyone is a designer. All you have to do to be a designer is design something. And if you want to be a good designer, then you have to think about the things that you're designing and practice a little bit and learn a little bit. But everyone is a designer, and I really don't think there is a difference between a maker and a designer.
I guess a question about the dress is it safe to wear your mesh printed fabric? Any costume failure? So have you worn any out yet? Any issues?
So I haven't worn this piece out yet. I have worn a jacket. There's a jacket that I made as well that is, it's like a purchase jacket that I added 3D printed material to the back of, and it's I added like a mesh panel like this to the jacket, sewed it on like an applique, and added some lights underneath it so that these flash. And I've not had any issues with that. It's actually a lot more robust than I thought it would be. The material, when you sandwich the mesh into the first 2 layers like I do, it's on there good. It's not going to come off. You're going to rip the mesh before you get this material off. I would say comfort-wise, there's some design choices that I could make to improve the comfort of a piece like this, where this is going to be close to your skin. So one big reason I'm adding a lining to it, obviously you can see through this, so that's one reason for the lining. But another reason is I want to keep this material off of my skin, because anytime there's a sharp edge, I mean, it's plastic, so it's going to poke you. So I'm trying to use this silk. I'm making the lining out of this silk, and it's going to kind of prevent that abrasion from happening when I'm wearing this dress.
I guess the last question we got here is, how close to your original, design or image of the spacesuit and the dress you're making to what your final outcome is? How much I mean, how much time did you have to change or modify it to get to where you wanted?
Oh, that's a great question. So my design process is always a meandering path, and I might have a really big vision when I start, but I know that when I get to the end of it, it might be something completely different. And in the past, I used to think that that meant I was doing something wrong. Like I used to think that I had to know exactly what it was going to be before I started making it. And I had to be able to draw a perfect picture of it. And then it would just be a simple matter of like making that thing. But it's not like that for me. And over the years of making, I've realized that I just don't work that way. So for me, it's kind of a process of like, I have this vision, and I think that's why I work better with inspiration than like specific sketches before I dive into making something. I start with this vision, and I kind of work out the details of it as I'm going through the process of making it. And I encounter these moments where I'm like, I have to make a decision about what this is going to look like or how this is going to work. It's easier for me to encounter that in the middle of the process while I'm moving through it than it is for me to predict what that's going to be before I even start building it. So I would say for the spacesuit, it actually looks quite a bit like what I envisioned, but I think that's because I did so much work in the vision portion. Like I did so much work in the inspiration section of my process that I had a really good like definition of it in my mind. But often I'll just jump in and kind of work it out as I go.
Awesome. So I saw Wizard Filament actually put in the chat their link to their filament, so that's awesome.
Oh, great. Oh, yeah,
so
it's beautiful stuff.
So this is a question for me, I guess. I know that Adam Savage has all these things, folders, he creates all these things. How do you catalog all these inspirations for yourself? Like how did you, like the stuff when you talked about Star Trek and the stuff, do you have a place where you actually catalog all these things and put it together? Or how do you guys work on that? Like how do you catalog that and have that so you can have that recall?
Yeah, I have multiple tools. I have a lot of folders. I have a whole removable drive that I stick onto my computer because I just don't have space for all of this on my computer. And I collect a lot of inspiration in folders for specific projects. I also print out a lot. I know like nobody uses their printer anymore. I use my printer all the time. I like to make physical like mood boards of my inspiration or notebooks for my project. So once I decide what makes the cut for inspiration for my project, I'll print it out, I'll stick it up on my wall, I'll throw it in a notebook. I like to be able to physically hold that stuff in my hand and take it with me when I go shopping for materials, or if I'm going to sketch, I put all of those physical things out. I kind of like that process to be offline. So I do a lot of, I have a lot of paper in my workflow. I also use Evernote a lot to capture ideas, to tag them, to organize them into projects. I throw all of my code into Evernote. I know there are probably better ways to do that, but I like to throw all of my code into Evernote because it's super searchable. So if I'm ever like, how do I do an if-then statement? Then I just go into Evernote and I type if-then, and then my code, any code that I've done that has it pops up. So I love that. I have to store a lot of different kinds of information because I do so many different kinds of making. Like I do design, and then I do coding, and then I do, molding and casting. And I can't possibly keep all of that information in my head at one time. So I lean heavily on my notebooks. I have a lot of notebooks. I type a lot into my Evernote, and I just try to capture everything somewhere,
Awesome. I guess next question is probably a follow-up of that one is, how do you keep your, how do you keep your projects in budget? So most people are saying, I usually start working on a project and then I always will go over budget. How do you budget, and how do you go about getting that material and staying in budget?
It's such a hard thing to do, especially when you dream really, really big, which I do. For budget, I lately have been realizing, and actually the lockdown's been great for this. I've been realizing that I have accrued over time so many great materials, so many great tools. And my goal now is to use all that stuff. So I'm trying to go into some projects with like no budget now, because I just want to use up everything that I have. Um, I I kind of go into my project thinking I'm going to be really cheap. I'm just going to start with the cheapest material. I'm just going to do spray paint. I'm not going to do anything fancy like airbrushing. I want it to be as cheap as possible. I start out cheap, and as I go through the project I realize like I did not budget enough for this. Like I wasn't realistic about my goals and my requirements for this thing that I'm making. So I think my biggest advice, and I'm totally saying this to myself about how to stay on budget, is to be realistic when you're budgeting. I think that's the key to staying on budget. And when I go off budget, it's because I wasn't realistic when I was budgeting. You know what I mean?
I guess I think it's almost out of all questions, but I'll ask a question about time management. How do you time manage your projects? I know, like this, everybody has a Comic Con or a con or a Maker Faire where it's that crunch time. How do you budget your time, and how do you budget to get to that?
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, because in the past I've had all these great deadlines, and for me, the only way I can be effective at time management is if I have a deadline and then I work backwards from that deadline. And if it's great if it's a hard deadline because there's a public event or it's due to someone, that is the best kind of deadline. And, I can't do anything to negotiate that deadline. I just have to hit it. That's when I'm best at managing my time. And that's also when I'm most realistic about my budget, interestingly enough. Like, when there's some outside factor that you can't control, that's so helpful. It becomes a framework for your project. And I find that so helpful. This year's been really challenging because a whole bunch of deadlines have evaporated, right? Like there's no physical place to wear a costume to. So these things have been stuck in like 90% done limbo land for a really long time. And that is just like, why is it so hard to get past 90% done? It's just, So for me, having a deadline is the most important part of time management. And then I just work backwards. I use my calendar a lot. I will calendar out specifically like what I'm going to do each day so they can hit like little milestones. I find that if I set up little milestones on my project, either in the form of a to-do list or literally like I schedule them on specific days, I can check those off as I go. I gain this feeling of accomplishment throughout my project, and I have a much better chance of hitting that deadline and getting it done if I do that.
Awesome. I think that's really it. I mean, we hit the 450 mark. I know some questions around how can you follow Sophy. We'll be posting all of Sophy's stuff inside the chat and inside the app. But if you Google her, there's amazing work by Sophy everywhere. So Sophy, thank you for your time. Again, I will promise that I'm going to post a video later, so anybody didn't get to watch this video can tell their friends about the video. It'll be posted in the app and on our YouTube channel. I'll also post in the chat all of Sophy's links to social media, and I have both of the articles from Make already in my folder and my Evernote. So I will add those there to you, and then
Awesome.
For the folks that wanted the Glowforge and the stuff like that, and Wizard Filament, they're also in the chat now, so you can click on those before we end this. Sophy, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. You're so inspirational. I love your work.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks
for
coming, everybody.
Thank you for coming. And again, I hope you have a phenomenal rest of the weekend. We have some BattleBot panels coming up in a couple of minutes, so hope you can join us there. Bye, Sophy. Thank you.
Thanks.